Hello everybody and welcome back to the space where we say, I can sleep. We are here on the last weekend of yet another month that's passed in 2023, and I am going to continue doing this for the rest of the year until we get to next year. And it will start all over again. I hope you all are taking good care of yourselves and staying cool. School is now over, summer break has started. I hope you all have great plans, but if not, just relax. Take good care of yourself. And as per usual, if you are enjoying these readings and would like for me to continue doing these readings, you can show your support by leaving me likes, comments, sharing my stuff, and following me on my platforms like Spotify at iKenSleep, YouTube at iKenWin, TikTok at iKenWin, and Instagram at officially.iKenWin. Now let's ascend into Heaven Official's Blessing, Chapter 15. At Paradise Manor, Questions of Xianle. That sharp cry of desperation made Xilian's heart drop. He had hardly gathered his thoughts before his body was already charging in that direction. Outside the alley, there were a bunch of oddly shaped, sinister creatures gathered in a circle, yelling at one another. "We caught him! Beat him to a pulp again! Fuck! However much food this little scumbag pilfered off me, I'm gonna slice the same off him. Every single bit." Shi Qingxuan caught up. "Your Highness, what's going on?" Xilian didn't respond. He walked toward the group step by step, his pace growing in speed, and soon he broke into a run. He forcefully pushed past a couple of ghosts on the outside of the circle and saw that the one getting beaten was a boy dressed in tattered clothes. Judging by his size, he appeared to be around 15 or 16 years old, and he curled up on the ground trembling uncontrollably. Even though he clung tightly to his head, the layers of bandages that were messily wrapped around it were still visible. The bandages were covered in dirt, the same as his hair. Wasn't this the same bandaged boy that Xilian had briefly met at Mount Yujun? The boy who had run off and couldn't be found? No wonder the palace of Lingwen had been saying they couldn't find any trace of him. How could Heaven's Palace of Lingwen find him in the mortal realm if the boy had escaped to the ghost realm's territory? The ghosts that had been pushed aside by Xilian were outraged and shoved him out again, just as one of them moved to yank on the bandages on that boy's head. "This little beggar's probably a freak, even uglier than me. Look how scared he is of people pulling these things off his face." Lang Qinchu was furious. "What are you doing?" he cried. Then he walked up and hurled a few ghosts off to one side. Shi Qingxuan didn't have time to stop him and could only wave around with his fan. "Qinchu, I thought we agreed not to act so impulsively." This time around, Qinchu had riled up even more ghosts than before. "Where the hell did you come from?" they roared as they tackled him. "I'm sorry, Lord Windmaster," Lang Qinchu called. "This will be the last time." Then he jumped into the fight, whacking the ghosts about. Shi Qingxuan let out an exasperated sigh. "I'm never going on a mission with you again." After that, of course he also had to join the brawl. Annoyingly, they couldn't use any spells, lest they give off spiritual light, so they had to resort to fighting with fists and feet. A smaller part of the group that was still beating up the boy was forcefully broken up by Xilian. He knelt, wanting to help the boy up. "Are you all right?" Upon hearing his voice, the boy shuddered and took a peek at him from his fetal position. Now that Xilian could see his face, he finally noticed that the bandages wrapped around the boy's head were thoroughly drenched in blood. With patches of black and red, it was a frightening sight, an appearance more terrifying than when they had last parted. The two big eyes peeping out of the gaps between the bandages were wrapped black iris against the white, unusually clear. And yet those ink-black eyes that reflected Xilian's silhouette were filled with terror. Xilian took the boy by the arm. "Come, stand up. Everything is fine now." To his surprise, the boy screamed, shoved Xilian away, leapt to his feet, and bolted. Since this boy had once been infected by human face disease, he must have a connection to the kingdom of Xianle. Xilian's mind shivered at the mere sight of him, and he couldn't help but be a little dazed. Caught off guard by the force of the push, even his bamboo hat fell to the ground. After the initial shock, he called out, "Wait!" Just as Xilian was about to give chase, the few ghosts that he had pulled away earlier grabbed onto him. The boy headed down the street, which was livelier than ever. At the rate that he was effortlessly weaving through the groups of ghouls and ghosts with his small frame, he would disappear soon. It would be difficult for Roye to track down a person in this kind of setting, so in that split second of urgency, Xilian called out behind him, "My lords, I'll leave this matter to you. Let's separate for now. Go hide and we'll meet here again in 3 days at the latest." Roye slid out and sent those ghosts flying in the direction of the other two officials, while Xilian bent over slightly, picked up his bamboo hat, and set off running in the direction of the boy. He squeezed through the crowd with immense difficulty, shouting all the while, "Excuse me, excuse me." Because the boy had spent most of his life hiding and dodging in the mortal realm, escaping was practically second nature to him. His head could be seen in 1 second, then there was a shadow the next, and after that, there was nothing more. He was getting farther and farther away. Xilian didn't know if it was his imagination, but he felt that the crowds on the street were getting thicker by the minute. With humans and ghosts alike pressed against each other, it made it really difficult for him to jostle through. Xilian's mind was in disarray, so he knocked over a number of stalls, and he cried, I'm sorry. As he continued to run. Ghosts weren't to be crossed carelessly, however, and they yelled after him, "Sorry da shit! Catch him!" Xilian suddenly felt a chill on his back, as if a hand had seized him, and he immediately knocked it back. "Who is it?" The hand was a tentacle that had come out of nowhere, and a mob of ghosts came swarming, their screeching and rough voices surrounding him. Hey, let's teach this little pretty boy a thing or two. How dare he start shit in Ghost City?" A large, dense crowd of nefarious creatures poured onto the street. Seeing that he was about to lose the boy in the crowd, Xilian did his best to throw off the tentacle that caught him. "Everyone, I'm really sorry. I don't mean any harm. Please allow me to find someone, and we can discuss reparations afterward." The horde of ghosts was relentless. "You wish." In all the pushing and pulling, the boy had disappeared completely. Xilian was dazed, not quite sure what he was feeling. Was it disappointment at not being able to catch the boy? Or was it relief that a nightmare had passed once more? Suddenly, there was a commotion in the ghost crowd. They immediately parted, forming a path, as if someone of importance had arrived. Xilian came to his senses and saw a tall, black-clad figure walking straight toward him through the path created by the mob. That person yelled, "Settle down. Let him go." The black-clad figure, like most of the ghosts on the street, wore a mask. It was a funny mask, with a face that was contorted as if it was smiling woefully. The mob muttered under their breath, "It's the waning moon officer." And they released their hold on Xilian at last. It seemed this black-clad figure was someone significant in Ghost City. The moment he approached Xilian, he bowed. "Greetings, Dao Zhang. Changshu wishes to see you." "Huh? Me?" Xilian pointed to himself. The waning moon officer replied, "Yes, Changshu has been waiting for you at Paradise Manor." All around them, the mob sucked in their breath. "Changshu wants to see him? Did I hear that right? Paradise Manor? That's Changshu's sanctuary. He's never had guests there." Someone who had come from a different street pointed out. "Wait a sec. Isn't he the one who won against Changshu today at the Gambler's Den? I mean, the one Changshu educated?" All eyes were now focused on Xilian, each pair bigger than the next, forcing Xianle to raise the bamboo hat in his hand to hide from the stares. The waning moon officer beckoned. "This way, please." Xianle nodded and followed him. The crowd parted once more, and the waning moon officer led Xianle through the path. No one dared follow. And after an incense time, the two had left the bustling street behind and made their way further into a quieter, more remote part of the city. During their walk, the two barely conversed. The waning moon officer walked as though he was going to disappear into the shadows at any moment, so Xianle followed closely. As his eyes swept idly past the officer's wrist, he abruptly noticed that it bore a black cursed circle. It was something he was more than familiar with. A cursed shackle? His eyes widened, but he was silent in his shock. Just then, the waning moon officer spoke up. "We are here." Xianle looked up and realized he had been led to a lake. There were haunting will-o'-the-wisps floating above the waters, playing around and chasing each other. Next to the lake stood a large, resplendent mansion. The heavenly realm and the ghost realm both possessed glamorous architecture. However, the glamour of the heavens put an emphasis on prominence and prestige, whereas the glamour of Ghost City lay in bewitching frivolity. Even the large characters displaying the name of this mansion, Paradise Manor, emitted an evil aura. Strange music came from the inside, airy and soft, incredibly enchanting, as if there were many women giggling and teasing, singing and dancing languidly in play. Following the music, Xianle entered the mansion slowly. After raising a beaded curtain, warm, perfumed air came rushing at his face. Xianle turned his head slightly to avoid getting engulfed in the scent. A thick, snow-white rug made from the fur of some unknown beast covered the floors of the great hall of Paradise Manor. Surprisingly, it was a full pelt. Many beautiful and captivating women, barefoot and clad in light silk, were unfurling their lithe limbs like blossoming petals, sensual and beguiling as they danced to their heart's content. The music he heard came from them. The ladies were spinning seductively like bouquets of roses covered in thorns, blossoming in the deep night. When they spun over to Xianle, they playfully teased him with their eyes. If any travelers walking in the night were to accidentally intrude upon the scene, it was hard to say whether they'd be more frightened or enchanted. However, when Xianle scanned the main hall, his eyes went straight through those women to the person seated in the back. At the end of the great hall, there was a large divan made of black jade, expansive in size. Upon it, over a dozen people could lounge, but there was only one man seated there, and it was Huachang. There was a group of gorgeous ghost women dancing before him, but he didn't spare them any looks, only lazily keeping an eye on what was before him. In front of Huachang was a small golden palace. It roughly resembled a heavenly palace, but on closer inspection, that little structure was built from thin sheets of gold foil stacked upon one another. He was also absent-mindedly twirling a piece of gold foil in his hand. Gold Foil Palace. Xianle had played this game often when he was a child. It was no different from village kids stacking rocks to build houses. When he was younger, he disliked separation by nature, and it didn't matter what it was. As long as the objects were placed together, Xianle would refuse to separate them. So whatever it was he built, he'd forbid anyone to touch it. And he always wished desperately that he could glue the fragile sheets together so that it never collapsed. When he was even younger, if he saw his golden palace fall apart, he'd be distressed to the point of refusing food and sleep until the king and queen coaxed him from his shell. The golden palace before him now was grand, made of hundreds of layered foil sheets, and fragile like an egg, as if a gentle breeze could blow it down. Xianle couldn't help but chant mentally, "Don't collapse, don't collapse." A brief moment later, however, Hua Chang gazed at his work and flashed a smile. He extended a finger and flicked the top of the golden palace. The foil fluttered and collapsed into a heap. Gold foil was now strewn across the ground. The golden palace was destroyed, but Hua Chang appeared amused by his handiwork, like a child who'd pushed over a tower of building blocks. He mindlessly threw away the gold foil sheet that was still in his hand and jumped off the divan. The dancing women immediately stopped in their steps and backed off to the sides, silencing their songs. Stepping on the gold foil sheets as he went, Hua Chang walked toward the entrance. "Since Gaga is here, why not come in? We haven't been apart for that long, so don't be a stranger to Sanlang." At this beckoning, Xilian let down the beaded curtain. Earlier in the gambler's den, it was Sanlang who pretended not to recognize me. Hua Chang approached and stopped at Xilian's side. Lang Chenchu was there too, so if I didn't put on an act, I'd be giving Gaga trouble. That was a really sloppy act, Xilian thought. Hua Chang probably knew that Shi Chenchu was in the crowd too, so Xilian stopped worrying about hiding anything. Sanlang is knowledgeable as always. Hua Chang laughed. Of course. Of course. Of course. So, is Gaga here only to visit me? Of course. So, is Gaga here only to visit me? If Xilian had to be honest with himself, had he known Hua Chang was here, he would have asked for leave so he could pay him a visit. Alas, that was not what happened. Hua Chang, however, wasn't waiting for a response from Xilian at all, and smiled. Whether you're here to see me or not, I'm happy either way. Xilian was startled by those words. He hadn't had a chance to respond before the women standing on the sides started giggling. Hua Chang inclined his head, and they all stopped at once, their heads bowed low. They soon filed out of the hall, leaving only the two of them in this massive chamber. Come have a seat here, Gaga, Hua Chang said. Xilian examined him as he followed, smiling. So, this is your real appearance. Hua Chang paused slightly in his step. Maybe it was his imagination, but Hua Chang's shoulders seemed to stiffen for a flash of a second. The moment didn't last, and Hua Chang responded naturally. I did say that the next time we met, I would greet you with my real appearance. Xilian grinned and said earnestly, Not bad. Xilian's tone wasn't teasing or consoling. The words very simply said. Hua Chang gave a small smile back, and this time, it was genuinely relaxed. They took a few more steps when Xilian suddenly remembered something important he wanted to confirm with Hua Chang. He removed the silver chain from around his neck. By the way, Xilian said, did you leave this? Hua Chang glanced at the ring and smiled. It's for you. What is it? Xilian asked. Nothing important, Hua Chang replied. Just keep it for fun. Although that was what he said, Xilian knew that this object must be truly valuable, not something so insignificant. Then, thank you, Sanlang. Seeing Xilian put the chain with the ring back around his neck, Hua Chang's eyes shimmered brightly. Xilian looked around him. Back at the gambler's den, you said you were going to Paradise Manor. I thought it was something like a brothel or the red light district, but this looks more like an entertainment hall? Hua Chang arched his brows. Gaga, what are you saying? I never go to the red light district. Xilian was amazed. Really? Of course, Hua Chang replied. The two approached the black jaded divan and sat down next to each other. Hua Chang continued. This is nothing but a place I remodel now and then, a residence of sorts. I hang around here when I'm free. If I'm busy, I leave it be. So it's your home, Xilian commented. Residence, Hua Chang corrected, not a home. Is there a difference? Xilian asked. Of course, Hua Chang replied. A home has a family. A place where someone lives alone is not a home. Xilian felt his heart stirred by this. By that definition, It had been over 800 years since he had anything that could be called a home. Although Hua Cheng had no trace of loneliness on his face, Xianle thought they were perhaps alike. Hua Cheng continued, "If it's a home, then even a small place like Puchi Shrine is 1,000,000 times better than my Paradise Manor." Xilian agreed sincerely with the sentiment and smiled. "I didn't realize that Sunlang was this sentimental. But to compare this to my Puchi Shrine, you're really pulling my leg here." Hua Cheng laughed. "What's there to be embarrassed about? Truth be told, Gaga's Puchi Shrine is small, but it's so much more comfortable than my Paradise Manor. It's more like a home." "Is that so?" Xilian said warmly. "Then if you like it, in the future, come over whenever you want. The doors of Puchi Shrine will always be open for you." Hua Cheng's face lit up. "Since Gaga said so, then I'll gladly take you up on your offer. Don't think of me as a nuisance in the future." "There's no way," Xilian said. "By the way, Sunlang, I want to ask you for a favor, but I don't know if you'd have the time." "What is it?" Hua Cheng asked. "This is my territory. If you ask, I'll deliver." After some thought, Xilian said, "Before, when I was dealing with the case at Mount Yujun, I ran into a boy who might have originated from my kingdom." Hua Cheng narrowed his eye, but didn't say a word. Xilian continued his description. "The boy was too scared and fled, and I couldn't find him for the longest time. But earlier, when I was running around the streets of Ghost City, I discovered that he'd fled here. Sunlang, you are the lord of this land. Is there any way you can help me find him? The boy's face is wrapped in bandages, and he only just ran away from the front steps of Paradise Manor." Hua Cheng smiled. "All right, I understand. There's no need to worry, Gaga. Just wait." Xilian sighed a breath of relief. "Truly, thank you again." "This is nothing," Hua Cheng said. "But you left Lang Chinchu just like that?" Xilian thought to himself, if Lang Chinchu were here, straightforward and obtuse, who knows what trouble he'd start. It's probably best that we meet up later. Xilian replied casually, "His Highness Tai Hua caused you trouble earlier at the gambler's den. Sorry about that." That slightly condescending smirk appeared on Hua Cheng's face again. "What are you saying? Who is he to even count as trouble?" "The things he broke," Xilian started, and Hua Cheng laughed. "For Gaga's sake, I'll clear his account. He can go around as he wishes, as long as he doesn't show his face in front of me." Xilian was amazed. "You don't care that there are heavenly officials frolicking about your territory?" Could Hua Cheng really be that confident? Hua Cheng smiled. Gaga might not know this, but while all three realms proclaim Ghost City to be a hell of corruption, a pandemonium, in reality, everyone wants to come to carouse. So many heavenly officials pretend not to care or speak ill of this place, but behind everyone's back, they often come in disguise and conduct unspeakable business. I've seen too much. If they don't stir up trouble, then I don't care. And if they do, then even better, because then I can wipe them out all at once. It wasn't that His Highness Tai Hua was trying to cause havoc on purpose. It was just that, after seeing a round of that sort of bets go down, he felt he had to stop it. He acted on impulse, Xilian explained. That's his lack of expertise, Hua Cheng said impassively. Humans are all the same. When given the choice between gaining 10 extra years of life or cutting their enemy's life 10 years shorter, they pick the latter without hesitation. He then crossed his arms. That an idiot like Lang Chinchu can ascend? The heavens are truly lacking in humanity. Xilian rubbed his forehead, feeling a little guilty. You can't say it like that. After all, someone like me ascended 3 times. After some hesitation, Xilian spoke up again. Sunlang, it may be out of line for me, but I still have to say it. That gambler's den of yours is incredibly dangerous. Won't it blow up in your face one day? A place that allowed the betting of sons and daughters in people's lives, granting wishes for others' sudden death? It was dreadfully sinful. Never mind the little brawl. If one day the bets got out of hand, the heavenly realm wouldn't be able to stay on the sidelines. Hua Chang gave him a look. Your Highness, did you ask Lang Chenchu why he had to jump into that mess? Xilian was slightly taken aback, not quite understanding the intent of the question. Hua Chang continued. I bet he must have told you that if he didn't do it, no one else would. He was amazingly on the mark, obviously having seen through Lang Chenchu. That's indeed what he said, Xilian admitted. Then I'm the complete opposite, Hua Chang said. If I don't control a place like this, then someone else will. I'd rather that person be me. Xilian knew when to back down, and he nodded. I understand. It seemed, although Hua Chang was the sentimental sort, he also cared more about control and power than Xilian realized. Hua Chang continued. Nonetheless, thank you, Gaga, for your concern. Just then, Xilian heard a voice from the door. Zhongshu, I brought him. Xilian looked to the front entrance and saw the waning moon officer from before, bowing just beyond the beaded curtain. In his arms, he held none other than the ragged boy in bandages. Hua Chang didn't even turn his head. Bring him over. Thus, the waning moon officer carried the boy inside and put him gently on the ground. Xilian couldn't help but peek at the officer's wrist again to see whether there really was a cursed shackle. But he bowed and stood down swiftly after delivering the boy. Since there were more important matters at hand, Xilian cut in first and soothed the boy. Don't be scared. It was my fault last time. I won't do it again. The boy's eyes were wide with fear and confusion, but he stayed in place. Perhaps because he had run out of energy to escape, or perhaps because he knew he couldn't get away. He peeked at Xilian, then peeked at the lap table on the black jade divan. Xilian followed his line of sight and saw he was eyeing a plate of luscious fruit. The boy must have been hiding for too long and had not eaten. Xilian turned to Hua Chang, but before he said anything, Hua Chang answered, Go ahead. No need to ask me. It wasn't the time for politeness, so Xilian uttered a thanks and reached for the plate of fruit, giving it to the boy. That boy snatched the plate from Xilian and started stuffing fruit into his mouth. It appeared he really was desperately starving. Even when Xilian was at his worst, starved like a stray dog, he'd never shoved food into his face like this. Slow down, he chatted gently. After a pause, he attempted. What's your name? The boy mumbled as he ate, looking as if he was trying to say something but couldn't do so clearly. He may not have spoken in many years and has forgotten how, Hua Chang suggested. Indeed, it looked like this boy did not speak much, not even to Xiao Ying, and had likely been like this for a long time. Xilian sighed. We can do this slowly. By then, all the fruit on the plate had been devoured like a whirlwind. Seeing that his bandages were soaked in dried blood, covered in black and red spots alike, Xilian made a gentle offer after a moment of thought. There are wounds on your face, and they seem serious. Let me help take a look. At the mention of unwrapping his bandages, fear immediately engulfed the boy's eyes. However, after Xilian's tireless soothing and encouragement, he once more sat down obediently. Xilian retrieved a bottle of medicinal powder from his sleeve, moving slowly as he unraveled the mess of bandages around his head. As he suspected, although the boy's face was a mangled mess, all the terrifying little human faces were gone, replaced by large blotches of bright red scars. The last time they met at Mount Yujun, there were burns covering his face, but not as much blood. This boy must have used a knife to cut away the human faces from his own since then, leaving those scars behind. Xilian's hand trembled softly as he rubbed the medicine in. Hua Cheng caught his wrist and said, "Let me." Xilian shook his head and gently pulled his hand free, then said in a low voice, "No, let me do this myself." 800 years ago in the kingdom of Xianle, many who contracted this disease found themselves with no other options and chose this route of self-mutilation. It was hell on earth. Some would miss their target and cut where they shouldn't, and die from blood loss as a result. Some, although successful in removing the terrible lesions, never healed from those wounds. As Xilian wrapped fresh bandages around the boy's head, he realized that his features were actually quite proper. His nose straight and refined, his eyes black and clear. He should have been a handsome young man, but now he bore such a terrifying appearance. He was like many others before him. Even if he cut away the distorted human faces, his face would forever be a nightmare, never to recover. Xilian finished wrapping the new bandages before he asked with a shaky voice, "Are you from Xianle?" The boy turned to gaze at him with his big eyes. Xilian repeated his question, but the boy only shook his head. Xilian then asked, "Then where are you from, exactly?" The boy answered arduously, "Yang'an." The human face disease had only ever erupted within the kingdom of Xianle. Yet this boy was from the kingdom of Yang'an. Xilian felt his sight go dark and he blurted out, "Have you ever met White-Clothed Calamity?" White-Clothed Calamity, the origin of plagues, the symbol of misfortune. He was the nightmare of the previous generation of gods, before Crimson Rain Softflower was born. If not for Junwo, who personally exterminated him, that nightmare would have probably continued even to this day. That Supreme was always dressed in snow-white funeral garb, his expansive sleeves fluttering, and he wore a cry-smiling mask on his face. The mask was called that because the right half of it was smiling and the left half was crying, half joyous, half sad. If he was seen somewhere, it meant that place would soon be doomed to ruin and that chaos would befall the land. In the last battle before the fall of his kingdom, Xilian stood upon the towering city walls of Xianle's imperial capital. His face was covered in grime and tears and written with a lost and bemused expression as he gazed down at his kingdom. In his blurry vision, there stood a white silhouette among the fields of corpses just outside the city walls, his giant white sleeves fluttering, his figure distinct. Xilian dropped his head to look down at him, and the white apparition raised his head to look at Xilian, and waved directly at him. That cry-smiling mask was the nightmare Xilian couldn't chase away, even after hundreds of years. The boy didn't seem to know what the white no-face was, and only watched Xilian with a blank expression. All of a sudden, he let out a loud cry. It turned out that Xilian had unconsciously grabbed his shoulder and gripped too hard. It wasn't until the shout that Xilian snapped out of it and hurriedly released his grip. "I'm sorry." Hua Cheng spoke in a low voice. "You're tired. Go rest." As soon as he said those words, two dainty girls entered the hall from a small door on the side wall and took the boy away. He frequently looked back at Xilian as he was being led off, and Xilian comforted him. "Don't worry. I'll come find you again in a bit." Hua Cheng turned to Xilian. "Sit down and relax, and leave him for now. If you have any questions for him, I have my ways of prying open his lips." Prying open his lips sounded rather horrifying, and Xilian hurriedly replied, "No, that's all right. If you couldn't say anything, then let it go. We'll take this slow." Hua Cheng sat down next to Xilian. "What are your plans for the boy?" Xilian gave the question some thought. "Keep him with me and bring him along?" "He's a ghost, not human," Hua Cheng said. "Why don't you leave him here in Ghost City? I'll have no trouble feeding another mouth." Xilian replied earnestly, "Sanlang, truly, thank you, but When I said I would bring him along with me, it's not just for the purpose of keeping him around. Ghost City was indeed Hua Chang's territory, and if he was willing to protect the boy, then no one could harm him. Nor would he go hungry. However, the most important thing was to actually guide the boy, to help him organize his mind and speech so that he could look and behave normally. Ghost City was a bustling place, but it was chaotic and wild and unsuitable for such counseling. Xianle couldn't think of anyone who would have the patience to undertake this task besides himself. Xianle replied, "I'm already immensely grateful that you found him for me. I can't trouble you anymore with the aftermath." Hua Chang appeared to disagree, but didn't push further. He said plainly, "It's really no trouble. While you're here, just let me know if you need anything, and you're free to go wherever you want." Just then, Xianle noticed movement. The scimitar on Hua Chang's waist seemed to have gone through a sudden change. Xianle looked down and was instantly amazed. It turned out there was a silver eye crafted on the hilt of that scimitar. The pattern of the eye was formed by a mere few silver strokes. But although simple, it looked vivid enough to be alive. He didn't notice it at first because the eye was closed in a thin line. But just now, the eye fluttered open and revealed a crimson gem-like pupil, rattling as it spun once. Hua Chang noticed it too and said solemnly, "Guga, I need to leave for a bit. I'll be right back." "An alarm?" Xianle asked. Could Lord Windmaster and Qin Chu have shown their true selves here in Ghost City? Xianle rose too. "I'll come with you." Hua Chang gently pushed him back down. "Don't worry, it's not His Highness Tai Hua or the other one. Guga, just sit here. There's no need for you to go." Since Hua Chang made it that clear, Xianle couldn't keep insisting on going along. Hua Chang turned and left the main hall, waving from the doorway. The beaded curtain parted automatically as he approached, and once he exited, it let itself back down, clacking as it did. Seated on the black jaded divan, Xianle relaxed briefly and thought about the bandaged boy. Remembering the objective of his trip, however, he rose to his feet. He passed through the small door the girls had left from and came to a small garden. The vermilion corridor cutting across the garden was empty of life. Xianle was still wondering which way he should go when suddenly a black shadow flashed by. That retreating silhouette, it was the waning moon officer. Xianle recalled the cursed shackle on the officer's wrist. It had been on his mind. He was about to call out to him when the silhouette disappeared. From the way the man moved, it seemed he was wary of being discovered. Thus, Xianle soundlessly followed after him. Making his way to the corner of the building behind which the officer disappeared, Xianle clung to the wall and stealthily gazed over. That youth moved swiftly and was constantly on the lookout around him, extremely cautious and indeed afraid to be seen. Xianle wondered. The waning moon officer should be one of Sanlang's subordinates, so why is he sneaking around inside Sanlang's territory? Xianle suspected this man could possess ill intent, so he also hid himself and followed. The waning moon officer made a number of turns through the hallways, but Xianle held his breath and was always within a dozen steps behind. They rounded a corner and came to a long hallway, and at the end, there was a set of large, beautifully decorated doors. If he turns around now, there won't be anywhere to hide, Xianle thought. Unexpectedly, just as the thought crossed his mind, the waning moon officer stopped and turned his head. Xianle knew he was in trouble the moment the officer paused. Hastily, Roye flew out and wrapped itself several times around the wooden beam overhead, pulling Xianle up to the ceiling where he clung to the beam. The waning moon officer didn't see anyone behind him and didn't think to look up. So he turned around again and continued on his way. Nonetheless, Xianle still didn't dare to let himself down too soon. He remained pressed against the ceiling as he inched forward silently, thinking that he resembled a gecko as he moved. Good thing the other party didn't go far and stopped before a set of doors. Xianle stopped too, to observe. Before this door was a statue of a woman wily and beautiful. Of course, from Xilian's angle, all he could see clearly was her round head and a shallow, round jaded plate in her hands. The waning moon officer didn't move to open the door first, but instead turned to the statue and tossed something into the jaded plate. It made a crisp, clacking sound. Dice? Xilian guessed. It was a sound he'd heard many times today, and not one he'd forget for a long time. Sure enough, when the masked youth removed his hand and Xilian looked, it was indeed 2 dice in the jaded plate, both revealing 6 red dots. The waning moon officer tucked the dice away before opening the door. It was surprisingly unlocked, and when he entered through the doors and closed them behind him, Xilian didn't hear any sound of locks or latches either. He waited for a moment before he fluttered down to the ground as quietly as a piece of paper and crossed his arms as he examined the doors. This room didn't appear to be that big, and whatever the waning moon officer was doing inside should make noise. Yet once he entered, there was not a sound from within. Xilian decisively raised a hand and pushed. Sure enough, when he opened the door, there was not a soul inside. From the looks of it, this was a perfectly normal, if quite luxurious, little room. Everything inside was in order at a glance, and there was no possibility that there was a secret path. Xilian closed the door and looked thoughtfully at the female statue and at the jaded plate in her hands. It seemed that the mechanism lay in that jaded plate and the 2 dice. The room was still locked, not with a physical lock, but a magic one. A key was required to open this lock, or an authorization incantation. The dice must roll 2 6s in that plate for one to see the real destination behind those doors, but Xilian rolling 2 6s right then and there was something that would never happen. He could only gaze at the door and sigh. After he paced for a bit in front of the doors, he withdrew and returned from whence he came. After walking for a while, he stopped abruptly. Walking toward him from the other end of the path was a tall, red-clad figure with a slender and long silver scimitar hung at his waist. It was Huachang. He walked over with his arms crossed. "Gaga, I've been looking for you." He looked exactly as he did when he left, the only difference being that the scimitar on his waist was out of its scabbard. It, along with the scabbard, clattered against him, clanking as he walked, painting a picture of arrogance. However, that silver eye on the hilt of a Ming was closed. Xilian composed himself and said, "I was going to go see the child, but I didn't realize your house was so big, I got lost." At first, Xilian was going to tell Huachang about what had just happened, but when the words came to his lips, they turned around and he swallowed them. The reason he had come to Ghost City was to investigate the missing heavenly official. Any signs of suspiciousness must not be ignored, and who knows, maybe the missing official was imprisoned in that room? It'd be best if he could find a way to go through those doors first. If the 2 matters were unrelated, Xilian would report to Huachang about his subordinate's suspicious actions. But if the 2 matters were related... Huachang spoke as he led Xilian back to the main hall. "If you want to see that boy, I can send someone to bring him to you. There's no need to seek him out yourself." It was probably because Xilian had something to hide, but the way he spoke to Huachang unconsciously became more docile. You finished your business so fast?" "It's finished," Huachang replied. "Just another gang of useless trash embarrassing themselves, that's all." The tone in which he said useless trash was very familiar, and Xilian guessed. Did Green Ghost Qirong come and cause trouble? Huachang laughed. "That's right. Didn't I tell you that many have their eyes on my place here? Qirong has wanted Ghost City for himself for years now, but the most he can ever do is want and burn with envy. So every so often he'll send some even more useless underlings to cause mischief. Nothing worth mentioning. Don't worry about it. Actually, I just happen to have a place I want to show Gaga. My Gaga grant me the pleasure?" "Of course," Xilian replied happily. Traversing the long corridor, Huachang led Xilian to another lofty great hall. The doors of the hall seemed to be made of steel with violent beasts carved upon them. Horrible and terrifying. The moment Hua Chang approached, the beasts parted and opened the doors. A blast of killing intent assaulted Xianle before he even stepped foot into the hall, and he tensed, veins popping on his hands, prepared to face anything. However, once he saw clearly what was inside the hall, he blinked. His defenses melted away in an instant, and his legs moved on their own, bringing him inside. Within the Great Hall, all manner of weapons were hung on all four walls. There were sabers, swords, spears, shields, whips, warhammers. It was an armory. Any man finding himself in an armory such as this, surrounded by all kinds of weaponry, would feel as if he were in heaven, and his blood would boil with excitement. Xianle was no exception. His eyes were wide and his face bright. The last time he had felt such exhilaration was in Junwu's armory. Although his expression remained schooled, he was already so excited he was stammering. May I touch? Hua Chang smiled. As Gaga likes. Xianle's hands instantly flew out to feel the various weapons hung on the walls, so absorbed he couldn't tear himself away. All of these are masterpieces. This sword is splendid. A battle of one against many would most definitely bring out its godly powers. This one too. Wait, and that saber. Hua Chang was leaning on the wall near the door, watching Xianle's face flush with delight. Gaga, what do you think? Xianle was examining each piece so intently he was reluctant to turn around. What do I think? What? Do you like it? Hua Chang asked. I do. Xianle replied. Do you like it a lot? Hua Chang asked again. Very much, Xianle exclaimed. Hua Chang seemed to have snickered, but Xianle didn't notice. His heart was busy racing as he unsheathed the cold and shimmering verdant blade, at least 4 feet long, marveling as he did so. Has Gaga found any that he particularly fancies? Hua Chang spoke up again. Xianle's entire face was bright and glowing, and he was unable to stop singing praises. Yes, all of them. Originally, I was thinking Gaga didn't have any useful weapons on hand, so if there was anything here you fancied, you could just take it for yourself, Hua Chang said. But since Gaga likes them all, I'll give them all to you. No, there's no need, Xianle quickly said. I have no use for weapons anyway. Really? Hua Chang said. But I clearly see that Gaga loves swords. Liking them doesn't mean I have to own them, Xianle said. I haven't used one in years. Just looking makes me happy. Besides, I'd have nowhere to put them if you gave them all to me. That's easy to solve, Hua Chang replied. I'll give this entire armory to you. Xianle took that as a joke and grinned. There's no way I could take away a room this big. No need to take it away, Hua Chang said. I'll give you the property too. Just come visit when you're free. No, it's okay, Xianle said. An armory requires constant maintenance. I'd hate to neglect the weapons. Xianle placed the sword carefully back onto its holder and said nostalgically, Once upon a time, I owned an armory like this too. But it was burned down. All of these weapons are precious devices to be desired. You have to cherish them, Sanlan. That's easy too, Hua Chang said. If I'm free, I can help Gaga maintain the armory. Xianle laughed. Well, I certainly don't have the guts to ask my lord the Ghost King to do chores for me. All of a sudden, Junwu's warning right before he left for this mission echoed in Xianle's mind. The Scimitar Ming is a cursed blade, a blade of misfortune. To forge such an evil weapon would require terrifyingly cruel sacrifice and bloody determination. Do not touch it, and do not let it touch you either. If you do, the consequences will be unimaginable. Xianle contemplated but still decided to ask in the end. But Sanlan, none of these weapons are a match against your Scimitar Ming, right? Hua Chang cocked his left brow. Oh? Has Gaga heard of my scimitar too? I've heard some rumors, Hua Cheng replied. Hua Cheng snickered. I bet they aren't nice rumors. Did someone tell you that my scimitar was forged by an evil, bloody ritual? That I sacrificed living humans? Sharp as always, Xianle responded. Nothing too horrible. Everyone has negative gossip said about them, but not everyone would believe it. But perhaps I might have the honor of seeing the legendary scimitar Eming. You've actually already seen it, Guga, Hua Cheng said. He took a few steps closer to Xianle and said softly, Look, Guga, this is Eming. The eye upon the scimitar that hung at his waist rattled as it swiveled in Xianle's direction. It might have been Xianle's imagination, but he thought that silver eye was subtly squinting into a crescent.